Listen closely, for I shall tell you of a man who dared to peer behind the veil of appearances and glimpse the eternal fire that burns at the heart of all existence. His name was Plato, though the world knew him first as Aristocles, born into the golden twilight of Athens, when gods still walked among mortals, and philosophy was not yet a word, but a way of breathing, a manner of seeing that transformed the very air around those who possessed it. Picture, if you will, the marble streets of Athens in the dying days of the 5th century before the Common Era, when the city gleamed like a jewel set in the crown of the ancient world. The Parthenon stood newly completed, its columns catching the Mediterranean light and casting shadows that seemed to dance with the wisdom of ages. Into this world of beauty and contradiction was born a child whose soul would prove too large for the confines of any single lifetime, whose questions would echo through corridors of time that stretch unbroken from his day to ours. The boy who would become Plato was born to privilege, his bloodline tracing back to the legendary Solon, lawgiver of Athens, and to kings whose names were carved in stone before Homer sang of Troy. Yet privilege, as he would learn, is often a prison of its own making, and the young Aristocles found himself restless within the golden cage of Athenian aristocracy. He was tall and broad-shouldered, earning the nickname Plato, meaning broad, from his wrestling companions. For in those days, a philosopher was expected to be as strong in body as in mind, understanding that the vessel must be worthy of the truth it seeks to contain. But it was not in the wrestling grounds that young Plato's destiny awaited him. No, it was in the bustling Agora, among the merchants and the curious, the seekers and the scoffers, that he first encountered the man who would change the very architecture of his soul. Picture the scene: a marketplace alive with the commerce of ideas as much as goods, where vendors hawked their wares beneath a sky so blue it seemed to have been painted by the gods themselves. And there, surrounded by a shifting crowd of followers and critics, stood a figure unlike any other, a man of modest appearance but extraordinary presence, whose words fell like seeds into the fertile soil of eager minds. This was Socrates, the gadfly of Athens, the midwife of souls, the man who claimed to know nothing yet somehow knew everything that mattered. He was perhaps 60 years old when Plato first encountered him, his face weathered by decades of questioning, his eyes bright with the fire of eternal curiosity. Socrates possessed a gift, or perhaps a curse, that compelled him to examine life with the intensity of a jeweler studying a precious stone, turning each assumption, each belief, each comfortable certainty until its flaws became visible in the harsh light of reason. When Plato first heard Socrates speak, it was as if a bolt of lightning had struck the young man's soul. Here was someone who understood that the unexamined life was not worth living, who knew that true wisdom began with the recognition of one's own ignorance. Socrates did not teach in the manner of the sophists, those clever merchants of words who sold certainty to the highest bidder. Instead, he practiced a different art entirely, the art of questioning, of drawing forth the truth that lay hidden within the depths of the human spirit, like water waiting to be drawn from a well. The method was deceptively simple. Socrates would approach someone who claimed expertise in some area of knowledge, courage, perhaps, or justice, or beauty, and begin to ask questions. Not accusatory questions, but gentle, probing inquiries that seemed innocent enough at first. "What is courage?"
he might ask a renowned general. "Can you give me a definition that covers all cases of courage and excludes all cases of cowardice?" And so the conversation would begin, each answer revealing new questions, each certainty crumbling like a poorly built wall, until the alleged expert stood naked before the truth of his own ignorance.
Yet this was not cruelty, but compassion, not destruction, but creation. For Socrates understood that the mind, like the womb, must be emptied before it can be filled with new life. He called himself a midwife of souls, helping others give birth to ideas that had been growing within them unrecognized. And in this process of intellectual childbirth, both questioner and questioned were transformed, emerging from the encounter not with easy answers, but with a deeper appreciation for the complexity and beauty of existence.
Plato drank deeply from this fountain of wisdom, following Socrates through the streets of Athens like a devoted disciple, learning not just what to think, but how to think. For 8 years he walked in the master's shadow, absorbing not merely the content of his teaching, but its spirit, its method, its profound reverence for truth. He learned that philosophy was not an abstract academic exercise, but a way of life, a commitment to follow the argument wherever it might lead, regardless of the personal cost.
And the cost, as Plato would learn, could be devastating. Athens, that glorious city of democracy and culture, was also a city of suspicion and fear. The Peloponnesian War had drained its strength, and defeat at the hands of Sparta had left the Athenians looking for someone to blame for their misfortunes. Socrates, with his relentless questioning and his refusal to conform to conventional wisdom, made an easy target. The charges brought against him were as ancient as they were unjust: corrupting the youth, introducing new gods, undermining the faith of the city.
Picture the scene in the great court of Athens, where 500 citizens sat in judgment of the man who had devoted his life to making them think. Socrates stood before them, now 70 years old, his hair white as snow, his bearing still erect despite the weight of years and accusations. He could have fled the city, could have accepted exile, could have begged for mercy. Instead, he chose to use even this moment as an opportunity for teaching, defending not merely his actions, but the very principle of philosophical inquiry itself.
"I shall never cease from philosophizing," he told his accusers, his voice carrying the authority of absolute conviction. "I shall continue to question and examine and cross-examine. And if I find that someone does not possess virtue but claims he does, I shall rebuke him for scorning the things that are of most importance and caring more for what is of less worth."
The vote was close, closer than his enemies had hoped, but the verdict was death. Even then, Socrates remained true to his principles, using his final weeks to explore with his friends the nature of the soul, the possibility of immortality, the meaning of death itself. Plato was there, witness to conversations that would later become the dialogue we know as the Phaedo, watching as his master faced the ultimate test of his philosophy with a serenity that spoke of truths deeper than any that politics or popular opinion could touch. The hemlock was administered at sunset, and as the poison slowly claimed Socrates' body, his spirit remained luminous, undiminished. His last words, as Plato recorded them, were characteristic in their attention to detail and their concern for others. "Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Please don't forget to pay the debt." Even in death, he was teaching, reminding his friends that death might be not an ending, but a healing, a cure for the disease of ignorance that afflicts all mortal souls. For Plato, The death of Socrates was both ending and beginning. The man who had been his teacher, his guide, his spiritual father was gone, but the questions he had raised, the method he had pioneered, the vision he had glimpsed, these remained, demanding to be developed, expanded, given fuller expression. And so began what we might call Plato's great labor, the work of a lifetime that would transform not just philosophy, but the very way human beings understand themselves and their place in the cosmos. In the immediate aftermath of Socrates' death, Plato fled Athens, unable to bear the sight of the city that had murdered wisdom itself. He traveled to Megara, to Egypt, to Sicily, seeking in distant lands the peace he could not find at home. But geography cannot heal the wounds of the soul, and Plato discovered that the questions Socrates had planted within him would not be silenced by mere distance. They grew and multiplied, demanding answers that no existing philosophy could provide.
It was during these years of wandering that Plato began to conceive the great vision that would become his life's work. Socrates had shown him that true knowledge was possible, that beneath the shifting sands of opinion and appearance lay bedrock truths that could withstand the most rigorous examination. But Socrates had been content to explore these truths through dialogue and conversation, leaving no written record of his insights save what lived in the memories of his followers. Plato saw the need for something more, a systematic exploration of reality that would provide the philosophical foundation for a just society, a good life, and an understanding of the divine nature that animates all existence.
The vision that came to him was breathtaking in its scope and revolutionary in its implications. What if, Plato wondered, the world we see with our eyes and touch with our hands is not the real world at all, but merely a shadow cast by a higher reality? What if the true objects of knowledge are not the particular things we encounter in daily life, this horse, that tree, this act of courage, but the eternal, unchanging forms or ideas that these particular things imperfectly represent? Picture, if you will, a realm beyond the reach of mortal senses, where perfect beauty exists, not in any particular beautiful object, but as beauty itself, pure and unmixed with ugliness. Imagine perfect justice, not as we find it imperfectly embodied in human laws and institutions, but as justice itself, the eternal standard by which all human attempts at justice must be measured. Envision perfect goodness, not as we encounter it in the mixed and temporary goods of earthly existence, but as the good itself, the source and measure of all that is truly valuable in existence. This was the theory of forms that slowly took shape in Plato's mind during those years of travel and reflection. It was a vision that solved many of the problems that had plagued earlier philosophers. How could we have knowledge of a world that was constantly changing? Because true knowledge was not of the changing world of appearances, but of the eternal world of forms. How could we recognize justice or beauty or courage when we encountered them? Because our souls had once beheld these perfect forms directly and retained a dim memory of their perfection.
But the theory of forms was more than an abstract metaphysical speculation. It was the foundation for a complete philosophy of life, a blueprint for understanding everything from the nature of love to the structure of the ideal state. For if the world of appearances was indeed a shadow world, then the philosopher's task was to help others turn away from shadows and toward the light that casts them.
This metaphor of light and shadow became central to Plato's teaching, finding its most powerful expression in the allegory that has captivated minds for over 2 millennia. Picture a cave, deep beneath the earth, where prisoners sit chained in darkness, their heads fastened so that they cannot turn around. Behind them burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners runs a road along which men carry objects that cast shadows on the wall in front of the captives. The prisoners, having never seen anything else, mistake these shadows for reality itself.
But what if one prisoner were freed from his chains and compelled to turn around? At first, the fire would hurt his eyes, accustomed as they are to darkness. The objects casting the shadows would seem less real to him than the shadows themselves. And if he were dragged up the steep path to the cave's mouth and into the sunlight, he would be in agony, temporarily blinded by the brilliance of the true light. Yet gradually, his eyes would adjust. He would see first the shadows of things in the upper world, then their reflections in water, then the things themselves, and finally the sun itself, the source of all light and life. And when he understood what he had seen, would he not pity his fellow prisoners, still chained in darkness? Would he not want to return to them, to share what he had learned, to help them too find their way to the light?
This, Plato taught, is the philosopher's journey and the philosopher's duty. We are all prisoners in the cave of appearances, mistaking shadows for reality. But through the practice of philosophy, through the rigorous use of reason guided by love of wisdom, we can break free from our chains and ascend to the realm of true knowledge. And having glimpsed the eternal forms, we are obligated to return to the world of shadows, to help others begin their own journey toward enlightenment.
The philosopher-king, that controversial figure who appears in Plato's Republic, is simply the freed prisoner who has completed the journey and accepted the responsibility of leadership. He rules not from ambition or desire for power, but from love of wisdom and compassion for those still trapped in ignorance. His authority comes not from popular acclaim, but from his direct knowledge of the good itself, the form that stands at the apex of all reality and gives meaning and value to everything else.
But let us not imagine that this vision emerged fully formed from Plato's mind like Athena from the head of Zeus. It was developed gradually through decades of dialogue and reflection, tested against the questions of students, and refined through the give and take of philosophical conversation. When Plato finally returned to Athens, somewhere around his 40th year, he brought with him not a completed system, but a living philosophy, one that continued to grow and evolve throughout his long life.
The academy he founded just outside Athens was unlike any educational institution the world had ever seen. It was not a school in the modern sense with formal curricula and degrees, but rather a community of seekers, a place where those who loved wisdom could gather to pursue truth in the company of like-minded souls. The buildings were simple, set in a grove of olive trees sacred to Athena, goddess of wisdom. Over the entrance, it is said, was inscribed the words, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here." This was not mere academic snobbery, but a recognition that mathematics, and geometry in particular, provided the clearest example of the kind of knowledge that philosophy sought. Mathematical truths are eternal and unchanging. The theorem of Pythagoras was as true before he discovered it as it is today. Mathematical objects exist not in the physical world, but in the realm of thought, yet they are more real and more knowable than any physical object. A perfect circle cannot be drawn with compass and straight edge, yet we can know its properties with absolute certainty. Here, in mathematics, was a bridge between the world of appearances and the world of forms, a realm where the mind could exercise its power to grasp eternal truths.
The academy became the center of learning not just for Athens, but for the entire Mediterranean world. Students came from as far away as Sicily and Egypt, drawn by the promise of encountering wisdom in its purest form. But this was not wisdom as the sophists taught it, a collection of techniques for winning arguments and influencing people. This was wisdom as Socrates had understood it, a fundamental reorientation of the soul toward truth and goodness.
The method of teaching was dialogue, just as Socrates had practiced it. But where Socrates had worked primarily through questioning and refutation, Plato developed a more constructive approach. His dialogues, those masterpieces of philosophical literature that preserve for us the essence of his teaching, show us philosophy in action, the mind at work on the deepest questions of existence. They are not treatises or textbooks, but dramatic works, carefully crafted to draw the reader into the philosophical conversation itself.
Consider the Republic, that monumental exploration of justice and the ideal state. It begins with a simple question: what is justice? But as the conversation develops, guided by Socrates as Plato's dramatic spokesman, the inquiry expands to encompass the nature of the soul, the structure of reality, the purpose of education, the role of art in society, and ultimately, the very meaning of the good life. The dialogue moves like a great symphony, each theme introduced, developed, and woven into an ever richer tapestry of understanding.
The central insight of the Republic is that justice in the state is simply justice in the soul writ large. Just as the ideal state must be ruled by wisdom, with courage to enforce its decisions and temperance to moderate its desires, so the ideal soul must be ruled by reason, with the spirited element to carry out reason's commands and the appetitive element properly restrained. When each part performs its proper function, the result is harmony. Justice in the soul, justice in the state.
But the Republic is more than a work of political philosophy. It is a guide to the ascent of the soul from the world of appearances to the world of reality. The education of the philosopher guardians is a carefully designed program of intellectual and moral development, beginning with music and gymnastics to train the body and emotions, proceeding through mathematics to develop the mind's capacity for abstract thought, and culminating in dialectic, the art of philosophical conversation that leads the soul to direct knowledge of the forms.
The famous Allegory of the Cave appears in the Republic as an image of this educational process. The philosopher's journey from shadow to sunlight is not merely an intellectual exercise, but a moral and spiritual transformation. Those who have seen the light of truth are fundamentally changed by the experience. They can no longer be satisfied with the shadows that once seemed so real. They are compelled by love of wisdom to seek ever deeper understanding, and by love of their fellow human beings to share what they have learned.
Yet Plato was too honest a philosopher to pretend that the path of wisdom was easy or that its rewards were immediately apparent. The freed prisoner, when he returns to the cave, finds that his former companions mock him for his claims about the world above. His eyes, accustomed to sunlight, cannot make out the shadows as clearly as before. He seems to have been made worse by his journey, not better. The philosopher in the world of politics faces similar challenges. Those who have not glimpsed the forms find it difficult to accept the authority of those who claim to have done so.
This tension between philosophy and politics, between the eternal and the temporal, runs throughout Plato's work. He was deeply concerned with the practical question of how philosophical wisdom could be applied to the governance of human affairs. The Republic presents his vision of an ideal state, But Plato knew that such a state was unlikely to exist in the world of appearances. Later, in the Laws, he would develop a more practical approach to political philosophy, designing institutions that might work in the real world of human imperfection.
But the tension between ideal and reality was not simply a political problem for Plato. It was also a deeply personal one. He was a philosopher who loved wisdom above all else, yet he lived in a world where wisdom was often ignored or despised. He was a seeker after eternal truths who had to express those truths in the temporal medium of human language. He was a teacher who claimed the true knowledge could not be taught, but only discovered by each individual soul through its own efforts.
This paradox of teaching what cannot be taught finds its most beautiful expression in the Phaedrus, where Plato explores the nature of love, rhetoric, and the soul. The dialogue takes place outside Athens, in the countryside beside the river Ilissus, where Socrates and his young companion Phaedrus have gone to escape the heat of the city. The setting is significant, for it is here, in the realm of natural beauty, that Plato will develop his most profound insights into the nature of love and its relationship to wisdom. The dialogue begins with a reading of a speech by the orator Lysias, who argues paradoxically that a young man should grant his favors to someone who does not love him rather than to one who does. Love, according to Lysias, is a form of madness that leads to jealousy, possessiveness, and ultimately disappointment. Better to choose a companion who can offer the benefits of relationship without the dangers of passion.
Socrates responds with a speech of his own, initially supporting Lysias's position, but with greater eloquence and insight. But then, in one of the most dramatic moments in all of Plato's dialogues, Socrates suddenly stops and declares that he has committed a sin against love itself. He covers his head in shame and delivers a great recantation, a hymn to the divine madness of love that transforms the entire dialogue and reveals the deepest truths about the nature of the soul.
Love, Socrates now declares, is indeed a form of madness, but it is a divine madness, a gift from the gods that lifts the soul above the realm of ordinary existence. There are 4 types of divine madness: prophecy, which comes from Apollo; mystery initiation, which comes from Dionysus; poetry, which comes from the Muses; and love, which comes from Aphrodite and Eros. Of these, love is the greatest, for it alone has the power to restore the soul's memory of the eternal forms.
The soul, Plato teaches in the Phaedrus, is immortal and has existed before birth in the realm of the forms. There, in the company of the gods, it gazed upon perfect beauty, perfect justice, perfect goodness itself. But in the course of its celestial journey, the soul lost its wings and fell to earth, where it became imprisoned in a mortal body and forgot its divine origin.
Yet the memory is not completely lost. When the soul encounters beauty in the world of appearances, the beauty of a human face, the beauty of a mathematical proof, the beauty of a noble action, it is reminded of that perfect beauty it once knew. The soul's wings begin to grow again, and it experiences the sweet pain of remembrance. This is the true nature of love, not merely desire for physical possession, but the soul's recognition of its own divine nature reflected in the beloved.
The lover who has experienced this divine madness becomes a philosopher, for philosophy is nothing other than the attempt to recover the soul's lost memory of eternal truth. The beloved, in turn, is drawn into the same ascent, for love is contagious in the most beautiful sense. Together, lover and beloved climb the ladder of love,
from attraction to physical beauty to appreciation of spiritual beauty, from love of one beautiful soul to love of all beautiful souls, from love of beautiful souls to love of beautiful institutions and laws, from love of beautiful institutions to love of beautiful knowledge, and finally to love of beauty itself, the form that gives meaning to all particular beautiful things.
This ascent of love is described even more systematically in the Symposium, that jewel of philosophical literature, where Plato brings together a group of Athenian intellectuals to speak in praise of love. Each speaker offers a different perspective on the nature of eros, building toward the climactic speech of Socrates, who reveals the teachings of the wise woman Diotima about the true nature of love.
The setting of the symposium is a drinking party at the house of the young poet Agathon, who has just won first prize in the tragic competition. The company includes some of the most brilliant minds of Athens: Phaedrus, the young aristocrat who loves speeches; Pausanias, the legal expert who distinguishes between heavenly and earthly love; Eryximachus, the physician who sees love as a cosmic force that harmonizes opposites; Aristophanes, the comic poet who tells the famous myth of the origin of love; and Agathon himself, who speaks of love as the youngest and most beautiful of the gods.
But it is Socrates who provides the deepest understanding of love's nature. Love, he teaches, is not itself beautiful and good, but rather the desire for beauty and goodness. It is the child of poverty and plenty, always seeking what it lacks, never satisfied with what it possesses. This is why love is the natural condition of the philosopher, who knows that he does not know, and therefore seeks wisdom with the passion of a lover.
The speech of Diotima, as reported by Socrates, reveals the ultimate purpose of love. It is not simply the desire for physical union or even for spiritual communion, but the desire for immortality. All creatures seek to perpetuate themselves, whether through physical reproduction or through the creation of spiritual offspring, ideas, institutions, works of art that will outlive their creators. The highest form of love is the love of wisdom itself, for wisdom alone is truly immortal and truly beautiful.
The symposium thus reveals the deep connection between love and philosophy that runs throughout Plato's work. Both are forms of desire. Both are driven by the recognition of incompleteness. Both seek to transcend the limitations of mortal existence. The philosopher is one who has learned to love correctly, to direct his desire toward objects that are truly worthy of love. And the lover who has been properly educated becomes a philosopher, for he has learned that what he truly seeks is not possession of the beloved, but participation in the eternal forms that make the beloved beautiful.
This connection between love and knowledge is explored from another angle in the Meno, where Socrates demonstrates that learning is actually a form of recollection. By questioning an untutored slave boy about geometry, Socrates shows that the boy already possesses knowledge of mathematical truths, even though he has never been taught them. The boy's knowledge must come from somewhere, and Plato suggests that it comes from the soul's prenatal acquaintance with the forms.
The theory of recollection solves what had been a famous paradox. How can we learn anything new? If we already know something, we don't need to learn it. If we don't know it, we wouldn't recognize it even if we encountered it. But if learning is recollection, then the paradox dissolves. We do possess knowledge, but it is buried deep within our souls, waiting to be awakened by the proper kind of questioning. This is why Socrates called himself a midwife of souls. He did not implant knowledge in his students' minds, but rather helped them give birth to knowledge that was already there. The process is often painful, like physical childbirth, and requires the destruction of false beliefs before true knowledge can emerge. But the result is genuine understanding, not mere opinion or hearsay.
The distinction between knowledge and opinion is crucial to Plato's philosophy. Opinion deals with the world of appearances, the realm of becoming where everything is in constant flux. Knowledge deals with the world of forms, the realm of being where everything is eternal and unchanging. Opinion can be true or false, but it is inherently unstable, subject to change as circumstances change. Knowledge, by contrast, is eternally true and cannot be shaken by any external force. This epistemological distinction has profound implications for how we should live our lives. If we base our decisions on opinion, we are like ships without anchors, driven by every wind of doctrine. But if we can ground our lives in knowledge of the eternal forms, we become stable and secure, able to navigate the storms of existence with confidence and purpose. The most important of all the forms is the form of the good, which Plato presents as the source of all truth and reality. Just as the sun makes visible objects visible and provides the energy that sustains all life, so the good makes the other forms knowable and provides the reality that makes them real. The good is beyond being itself in dignity and power, the ultimate source of all value and meaning in the cosmos. This vision of the good as the supreme form is developed most fully in the Republic, but it appears throughout Plato's work in various forms. Sometimes it is presented as the One, the ultimate unity that underlies all diversity. Sometimes it is described as the Beautiful, the form that draws all souls toward truth. Sometimes it appears as the True, the standard by which all claims to knowledge must be measured.
But whatever name we give it, the good represents Plato's conviction that reality is ultimately moral, that truth and goodness are inseparably connected, that the cosmos itself is rational and purposeful. This is not a truth that can be proven by logical argument, but rather a vision that must be seen by the soul that has been properly prepared through philosophical education. The preparation for this vision is described in the curriculum of the Republic, which begins with music and gymnastics to train the body and emotions, proceeds through mathematics to develop the mind's capacity for abstract thought, and culminates in dialectic, the art of philosophical conversation that leads to direct knowledge of the forms. This educational program is not merely intellectual, but involves the entire person, body, mind, and soul working together in harmony. The mathematical portion of the curriculum is particularly important because mathematics provides the clearest example of the kind of knowledge that philosophy seeks. Mathematical objects exist not in the physical world, but in the realm of thought. Yet they are more real and more knowable than any physical object. When we study geometry, we are not investigating the properties of physical circles and triangles, which are always imperfect, but rather the properties of perfect circles and triangles that exist only in the realm of forms. This mathematical training prepares the mind for dialectic, the highest form of philosophical activity. Dialectic is the art of division and combination, of seeing how the many are related to the one and how the one gives rise to the many. It is the method by which the philosopher ascends from the world of appearances to the world of reality, using reason alone to grasp the eternal forms.
But dialectic is not merely a logical technique. It is a spiritual discipline that transforms the practitioner's entire being. The philosopher who has mastered dialectic has learned to see reality as it truly is, not as it appears to the senses or to untrained opinion. Such a person has achieved the greatest possible human happiness, for happiness consists in the soul's recognition of its own divine nature and its participation in eternal truth.
This vision of philosophy as a spiritual discipline appears throughout Plato's work, but it is developed most fully in the Phaedo, the dialogue that depicts Socrates' final hours and his teachings about the immortality of the soul. Here, philosophy is described as a preparation for death, a gradual separation of the soul from the body and its concerns.
The body, according to Plato, is the prison of the soul. It subjects us to physical pleasures and pains that distract us from the pursuit of truth. It binds us to the world of appearances and prevents us from seeing the eternal forms clearly. The philosopher, therefore, must learn to detach himself from bodily concerns and focus on the life of the mind.
This does not mean that Plato was opposed to physical existence as such. The body is necessary for the soul's development, and physical beauty can serve as a reminder of eternal beauty. But the philosopher must learn to see through the physical to the spiritual, to use the body as a tool for the soul's ascent, rather than allowing the body to dominate the soul.
The arguments for the immortality of the soul in the Phaedo are complex and have been debated by scholars for centuries. But their purpose is not merely to provide logical proofs, but to prepare the soul for its separation from the body. The philosopher who has lived properly has nothing to fear from death, for death is simply the completion of the process of purification that he has been undergoing throughout his life.
The soul, being immortal, will continue to exist after the body's death. If it has been purified through the practice of philosophy, it will ascend to the realm of the forms, where it will enjoy perfect knowledge and perfect happiness. If it has been corrupted by attachment to bodily pleasures, it will be reborn in another body and must continue the process of purification.
This doctrine of reincarnation, which Plato borrowed from the Pythagoreans and other mystical traditions, provides a framework for understanding the soul's journey through multiple lifetimes. Each life is an opportunity for learning and growth, a chance to remember more clearly the eternal truths that the soul once knew. The philosopher is one who has progressed farther along this path than others, but all souls have the same ultimate destination.
The vision of the soul's journey is presented most dramatically in the myth of at the end of the Republic. Is a warrior who dies in battle, but is allowed to return to life to tell of what he has seen in the afterlife. He describes the judgment of souls, the punishment of the wicked, the reward of the righteous, and the process by which souls choose their next lives.